In 2003, the United States invaded Iraq based on lies and manipulations that changed the course of history. During this intervention, which involved several countries plus its consequences that extended for years, around 1.2 million people died, according to the estimate. According to the most pessimistic estimate from the ORB International Agency. The big question is, what objectives was the United States pursuing and how did it manage to convince the world and get its way? Are you interested? Alright, then stay until the end of the video. As always, let's go back to the background. And for this, we must mention that well-known event that changed the world in September 2001. But we won't go into detail because of YouTube's sensitivity. That's why we put kittens in the background. After this event, attributed to the terrorist group Al-Qaeda, President George Bush declared war on international terrorism. Having said that, a series of countries around the world joined Washington's initiative to combat various terrorist groups. This struggle continues to this day, with the Sahel front being the most critical at present. Now let's talk a little about the co-star country of this video, Iraq. At that time, Iraq was ruled since 1979 by the Ba'athist dictatorship of Saddam Hussein. The rivalry between his government and the United States was very marked, the most important precedent being the Gulf War of 1991. In it, a coalition led by Washington intervened to expel Iraq from Kuwait, a country that had been unilaterally annexed. Having said that, let's go back to the year 2003, 2 years after that attack, for which we better show puppies. On February 5th of this year, then Secretary of State Colin Powell presented a speech to the UN in which he showed alleged evidence that Saddam Hussein's government possessed weapons of mass destruction. In addition, his regime was accused of maintaining ties with Al-Qaeda, the terrorist group that perpetrated the 2001 attack. That being said, the so-called Operation Shop and Owl began on March 20th, 2003, led by the United States with the support of troops from the United Kingdom, Australia, Poland, and Kurdistan. A few days later, American forces from Jordan and Kuwait captured Baghdad, thus marking the collapse of Saddam Hussein's government, who was captured in December of the same year. Thus began the period of occupation of Iraq, first under the Organization for Reconstruction, and then as the Provisional Authority of the Coalition. However, this did not bring peace, as it was followed by a period known as the Iraqi Insurgency. During this stage, various factions, such as the fascists, supporters of Hussein, Al-Qaeda, Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, Hezbollah, and the Mujahideen, fought against foreign occupation and in many cases among themselves. This insurgency resulted in a prolonged period of instability, violence, and social fragmentation. Al-Qaeda established a significant presence in Iraq, escalating the violence between Sunni and Shia communities. Power vacuums in certain areas allowed for the rise of the Islamic State. Finally, the United States withdrew in December of 2011, leaving security control to the new Iraqi government to pave the way for a prolonged period of peace and stability. Nah, I was joking. In 2014, a terrible civil war breaks out again between Iraq and the strengthened Islamic State, with the participation of other factions such as the Baathists, the Kurds, and the Naqshbandiya army. This war lasted for almost 4 years, culminating in the victory of the Iraqi government, which managed to maintain territorial integrity while the Kurds retained some autonomy in the north of the country. At this point, it is clear that the American invasion was the beginning of a series of constant tragedies in Iraq that extended until 2017. The consequences included over 1 million deaths, an unprecedented refugee crisis that even affected Europe, the massive destruction of Iraqi cities, the strengthening of the global terrorism, the devastation of the oil industry with its consequent damage to the ecosystem, and the loss of great historical heritage. As for the reasons that the United States put forward to justify the destruction of such a distant sovereign state, these have already been debunked through various leaks. One of the most important is the Downing Street memo from 2002, a document leaked in 2005 that contained minutes from a British government meeting. These minutes indicated that intelligence and facts were being manipulated to justify the invasion of Iraq. On the other hand, a series of discredited reports revealed that the Central Intelligence Agency and the Federal Bureau of Investigation had no conclusive evidence that Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction or had ties with Al-Qaeda. Furthermore, a 2004 United States Senate report concluded that the Bush administration exaggerated the threat from Iraq and lacked solid evidence about WMDs, which were never found during the invasion. It's also worth mentioning the revelations of Lawrence Wilkerson, the Chief of Staff of the aforementioned Colin Powell. Wilkerson publicly stated that the intelligence about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq was manipulated. In addition, he expressed his regret for his role in Powell's 2003 speech to the UN, as it was based on unreliable sources. At this point, it is necessary to analyze what could have been the real motivations of the United States to undertake this invasion. The first, playing devil's advocate, is the desire to overthrow Hussein's authoritarian regime. His government was indeed very bloody and committed crimes such as the massacre in Iraqi Kurdistan during the Al-Anfal operation, in which tens of thousands of Kurds were exterminated. Although, of course, only some selective dictatorships seem to be worthy of invasion. From a geopolitical perspective, the overthrow and execution of Saddam Hussein reshaped the balance of power in the Middle East. Establishing a pro-Western democracy could have served as a counterweight to Iran, which has certain allied factions in the country, like the Islamic resistance of Iraq. In addition, the United States built military bases in Iraq, very close to its main enemy. There could also have been economic motives, as Iraq has one of the largest oil reserves in the world. At that time, the United States was not the main oil producer as it is now, and the invasion allowed it to exert significant influence over the global crude market. Although Hussein's links to terrorism were not proven, there were suspicions about it. The United States government, under pressure, used the invasion as a demonstration of its power. On the other hand, there were pressure groups within the United States, such as defense contracting companies and pro-Israeli groups, that could have influenced the decision to invade Iraq. Additionally, the Bush administration may have used the invasion to divert tension from internal problems and strengthen political support through national unification in times of war. So as you can see, the invasion of Iraq in 2003 serves as a lesson about the power of manipulation by the great powers and the catastrophic consequences that this can bring, where the main victims are ordinary citizens. Fortunately, in the era of digital communication, governments face greater difficulties in deceiving the public. We must then remain vigilant to avoid being fooled again. Do you think any power could again fabricate a similar deception to justify a future aggression? Don't forget to leave your comment and subscribe to the channel. Also, I leave you in the description my social networks. And in case you want to see the new videos in pre-premiere and have a greater interaction with me, your donations on Patreon, unamanito.net or channel members are welcome. Until next time.